Manson wanted to be a music star. Before long, he would be over hanging out at Neil's place, and the two would sit together and play. And Neil said that Manson was a brilliant musician. He had brilliant songs. Neil tried to get him a record company with Warner's. He spoke to the powers that be there, but luckily nothing happened from it. They didn't, I guess, see that. And so Neil had moved away anyway, as he often does from difficult situations.
We're totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, conversations with authors, musicians, and insiders revealing the stories behind classic rock's greatest songs, albums, and artists. If you're enjoying the show and you'd like to support it, you can always sign up for the Booked on Rock Backstage Pass on Patreon. Just $5 a month. Get every episode commercial free and before everyone else. Just use the link in the show notes or visit bookedonrock.com. Now, on to our guest. I'm joined by author Sylvie Simmons to discuss the updated and revised edition of Neil Young Reflections in Broken Glass, a compelling portrait of one of rock's most enduring and unpredictable artists. Drawing on interviews with Neil, his friends, and fellow musicians, the book traces his remarkable journey from a young Canadian songwriter chasing a dream in Los Angeles to a 6-decade career filled with groundbreaking music, fascinating relationships, and revealing new stories featured in this expanded edition. Thank you for being here, Sylvie.
My pleasure.
This book is not a biography. It's kind of peeling back the layers of all that and getting to who Neil really is.
The premise of this whole book series, which turned out to be just 4 books by 4 different authors when it was meant to be huge, was something that Mojo magazine put together. Mojo is a UK rock magazine that I've been with since its first issue. And they're very serious about their music, and they decided to do a whole bunch of kind of very concise biographies of kind, very different kind, on the heroes, the people they really, really loved. One of those was Neil Young, and I, as his chief loving person, became the person who wrote that. And it was meant to be a kind of a quite concise history. In other words, it wasn't one of those big tomes that, you take out and you break your back kind of carrying. And every single thing is in there. And it's written in a kind of dusty, academic way. It was just trying to make real sense of the person you're writing about and to get to the essence of who they are. And, a good interview, when you're doing it for a good magazine that respects writers, what you're trying to do is to get to that essence of that person. What makes this person that you love so much in a musical way? What made them that way when they're sitting opposite you on a chair and being sometimes quite unpleasant or whatever? So this was a thing that I treated almost like a giant feature that I was writing. And I got my information firsthand by talking to people, talking to the people who knew Neil, talking to fellow musicians, talking to people he fell out with, and just trying to get at the heart at what made this man who he was and is.
What was your approach going in early on to achieve that? Because he's known as somebody who's difficult to open up.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I've chosen some of my favorite interviews with Neil as the extras of this kind of updated-ish book, as I would like to call it. I chose some of those, but there's mostly because they were the ones where he did open up a bit. Sometimes he closed very quickly after that when realizing he would do it. He's a very intelligent and sensitive man. But it was trying to found out certain things that he didn't like to talk about. For example, he hated to talk about writing songs. He had almost a sort of superstition about it, and some musicians do, which is, if I talk about them, it turns him into some different kind of being that is not going to be helpful to him. He didn't want to know how they came out, how it did, or if he left that strange line in that didn't really make much sense. He just wanted to do his work, and he didn't like people around of any type who were interfering with that. And certainly, you know, some of those might be people in a studio, but definitely they were sometimes interviewers.
Do you feel most artists light up and want to talk about that? Because most artists may be disappointed in the questions about, I guess, like, for example, Greg Allman. When in my radio days, I was going to interview Greg Allman, and I was so excited. I couldn't wait to ask him about all these songs and ask him about Dwayne. And one of my coworkers says, "Oh, you got to ask him about Cher. You got to ask him what it was like with Cher." And I remember I almost got like a little pissed off. I'm like, no, I'm not, because I don't think those artists appreciate that. That's not what they want to talk about. They would rather talk about their craft.
That's a long, complicated question and statement, and there's a lot of truth in there. But it depends on what you would ask them and why. So I think if somebody came in to interview a woman and then just said, "Oh, tell me about this marriage with Cher," they would say, "Mind your own business." But if you would say, "Well, it's really interesting because I read something that Cher said, this,
Right.
and how did that?" Or this song you wrote is kind of not exactly tender, love song. Was that something to do with Cher? I mean, if you made it more of a kind of a specific question in what did this person mean to you,
Sure.
he might well kind of come out with well, none of your business. Also, I think that a lot of musicians, certainly Neil, kind of guard that whatever that essence of them is that makes that music come out or makes them decide to put a record out or leave it for 15 years and come back and reissue it as an archive thing. There's all of these things where they don't want to know too much. And I think that changed a lot now. I've noticed that in my music journalism, as well as in my side thing as a singer-songwriter, the record companies and PRs want artists to tell what every song is about. When I'm sent a press release, I know everything. And I'd really not like to do that. I'd like to go deep into the music, hear it, listen to the words, and see what they are saying into my little life and head and world. And I think that's really what the artists want, but there's somebody standing there with a gun out and their heads telling us we have to say, well, oh yeah, that was because when I was married to that footballer, he kind of beat me up. And so that story came out in this song, but it could just perhaps be a beautiful song.
Yeah.
Leonard Cohen, who I wrote a book about, that was my last big book other than the Debbie Harry book I did with her. He was somebody he would never kind of want to give away that sort of information because it's taking the magic away. And a lot of music is down to hard work, of course, and talent, but there's an awful lot that's down to magic too.
Bob Dylan doesn't want anybody to know what the songs are about.
I love Bob Dylan. I still see him in my mind. They're sitting there, at a desk with a typewriter, and just the first crazy things that came into his mind went in there and he rhymed them. And he's a damn genius. So,
But I get the feeling a lot of times he's like, man, people are really reading into my songs. Wow. I mean, beyond what he'd ever anticipated.
Yeah, I think in a way, Neil writes songs for himself.
Yeah.
And he just, if he doesn't like it or it doesn't seem quite finished, to say he'll keep them. He'll just put them somewhere. He doesn't throw them out. They're there.
Which is unique, right? I mean,
it's unusual. Usually those kind of decisions when an album's put on hold or they've decided it's the record company that's made that happen. as with books, sometimes it's the publishers. If you've got a, an awful publisher, then they can be a complete pain, pain in the butt and stop things or not allow you to put things in. So, but Neil was very much, I do what I want to do, whenever I want to do it, with whoever I want to do it with. It was his motto. He proudly, when I kind of recited that to him, he had a big smile on his face. It's good to see a smiling Neil. And that was the thing. He did it. And then he moved on. And he didn't look back. That's the weird thing, the thing about the archives. He went back. And I said to him, well, you're looking back? No, I'm dealing with stuff that was unfinished. This is stuff that I'm, is now new material.
What is behind Reflections in Broken Glass, that title?
That came into my mind from Mirrorball. The Mirrorball. What did you think of that album? Did you love it?
Yes, I like it. The mid-90s work that he did, I'm a huge fan of.
It was just there. And it came up as well that at one point in his life, as I mentioned in one of the interviews, I've done so many interviews, so it's hard to just choose these, but that would have been a whole other 3 books, I think. But he had talked about how when he had a brain aneurysm, he was very seriously ill with it, and was meant to go and have an operation, but being Neil decided to go to Nashville, write an album there, and do an acoustic album. Every time he got ill, he tended to go off to Nashville and do an acoustic album. But he said that how he, his realization that something had gone wrong was he was on stage with at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame with the Pretenders. He was part of the band that was celebrating the Pretenders for being in the hall. And he said that something happened to his eyes where it felt like they were broken glass. And so when Pat Gilbert from Mojo had said to me, like, hey, we should give it a longer title. And the first thing that came into my head was Reflections in Broken Glass.
Isn't that cool? And I was telling you before we started this interview, Pat Gilbert was on about a month ago, or maybe more, for his book on The Clash. Mm-hmm. And he was a great guest. Yeah, there are things in this book that, there are parts of Neil's life that are still somewhat of a mystery. I think that you found that as well. And I think you were surprised that the journalists didn't do a little more investigating and talk to the people, not just Neil himself, but people in his life, like his first wife, right? Like you said, people know what did she stitch his jeans or something? That was like pretty much all she's known for.
Well, she got a credit on the album for making patches to put on the back of his jeans. But she was somebody that he met when he moved to Topanga Canyon early in his career, solo career. Neil, when he got his money for, from the record company for being part of the Buffalo Springfield, he very sensibly, for somebody of his age, bought a house, a little tiny, tiny house in Laurel Canyon. And then when he got his I guess probably slightly bigger money for being a solo artist, he got rid of that place and bought a bigger place that he did up in Topanga Canyon. And these two were very, very different neighborhoods, if you call them that, places. The whole image of Laurel Canyon was love and peace and hippies and long flowing garments and everything. It was a place of light and beauty and hippiness, and it was where, Crosby, Stills and Nash lived, not young. Was always separate in every single way. And talk to me about that in one of the interviews in there. I'm the only person in Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young that wasn't Crosby, Stills and Nash, said somewhat sarcastically in answer to one of the questions that I had. So he went to the Topanga Canyon, which had a kind of a sort of dark vibe. It was further away from the Sunset Strip for sure, much further away. And it was the kind of place where the police couldn't easily go up and arrest pot smokers because, it was so covered with woods and tiny lanes and everything. You couldn't get through, or you could see the cops coming and you could flush everything. So he got a place there, and there was a lovely little cafe up there, and he married the woman who was the cafe owner, and she had a child. So he had a kind of really almost like normal family life in a sense up there. It wasn't, the kind of going crazy with the groupies down on the Sunset Strip all the time, which was the image, at least, if not the reality, though I think it was the reality of LA back then.
Yeah. Was he protective of his personal life?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a lot he didn't talk about.
Yeah. Which would, I guess, explain why we don't know much about his first wife, but also
just somehow she disappeared. It was, I think, it was very kind of amicable in the sense that it had run its course. It wasn't a kind of rock star marriage or movie star marriage where there's going to be things in the paper. And he had moved on, and he found Peggy, and who very interestingly also worked at a restaurant, but didn't have a child until they had children, of course.
One of the things that I've always wanted to know a lot about is his dad, because I was a sports writer for many, many years, and I know his dad was a pretty well-known sports writer. How much do we know about him?
Well,
what was his relationship like with his dad too? Like, what kind of relationship did he have with him?
His dad left when Neil was a child. His mother was a very kind of powerful, forceful. I'm not saying that is in a bad way, but she was a tough cookie, and looked after the boy and everything. And I'm sure she couldn't have been very happy at having to do that on her own. And Neil seemed to kind of really, he was good. He kind of, at one point, he got chickens in the back garden of the Young household. There were chickens where he was getting the eggs and selling them to the neighbors. And I'm not sure if that was to buy himself, a new guitar or to help out around the house. That I don't know. But yes, his dad was seemed a much more open, kind of confident person in his personality to Neil. He kind of, he made himself a kind of well-known sports writer in a way. He was a bit of a sort of star in that area. And Neil always had this kind of slight, it almost felt like a fragility to him, to his being, which was actually true, because I kind of mentioned in the book, in the original book, that it was almost like kind of when God was going out handing out good health sort of cards, that Neil was off doing his paper run and they didn't give him one. He had a series of very serious health problems right the way through his life, starting off in Canada when he had polio. In the same year, I guess it was sometime in the 50s, when Joni Mitchell also got polio. And the effect of it on Neil was, you could sometimes see it when he's walking as a kind of slight, not a limp, but a kind of leaning to one side now and things. And in one of the interviews I did with him that's included here, I actually mentioned, was polio the reason that he has it? Sometimes when he's playing, especially with, his heavy band, when he's got them going with him, that there's a different speed, with one arm, one hand and the other. And he kind of looked at me somewhat menacingly and said, "You're going deep." Meaning, like, where is my manager? Elliot, come and throw this person out. So we were outside, so we'd have to throw me in, I guess.
Have you ever had those moments with him? You're like, oh boy.
Oh, I have.
He's going to walk out of here, or he's going to really get pissed at me.
Well, yeah, but then he just stops the interview, or he gets Elliot. But Elliot, his manager and best friend for years now, unfortunately no longer on the planet.
Oh.
He would say, "Oh, it's only Sylvie." You know, it's-
Yes. Because I'd be intimidated to sit in a room with him.
or he can be intimidating.
But is he
I-
misunderstood? There's a sensitive side to him. There's a softer side to him, but I don't think he wants people to know that, but we can hear it in his music.
Well, I think, really, if there was a tombstone and it said, Neil died, let's hope this doesn't happen for at least 100 years. I know it's whatever, but it would say it's none of your business.
Right.
It would say, because there is that thing where it's none of your business. It's music, doing the music, moving on from the music and not looking back.
That's what's got to make it so difficult for him, though, as an artist in the music business, because you can be a musician and hey, you could just do it for the love of it and play the local club every weekend. But when you get into the music business, there are things that you have to deal with, that a guy like him would just, he handles himself well. I mean, he can certainly take care of himself, but I would think he dreads having to go out on the publicity tours and stuff, like he was on Jay Leno, I remember, for Harvest Moon, and he seemed cool and he's funny. He's got a great sense of humor.
Oh yeah, he's great. You were saying he was doing it on his own. In the beginning, when he came out of, he'd been in his little bands and everything, different bands up in Canada, the one that was this kind of soul band, and then, just the kind
with Rick James.
All of it, with Rick
right?
James.
The Minor Birds.
Yeah, and it kind of broke up because they got arrested for, he being James, Rick James had got arrested for not going out and fighting in Vietnam or one of these things, So he had all these kind of other things in his folk bands, of course. But once they got going in LA and they had Buffalo Springfield, he was already in the business. So it was a case of just moving along and up, in a sense that once you got your foot through the door in the business back then, you were pretty much, somehow you were in that mafia group of whatever the record company you were with is. And if you were selling albums, they could sell your albums, you stayed there. And you used to get a couple of pass of maybe a couple of them not selling so much because they knew people wanted albums by Neil Young in one shape or another. So yeah, it was a different time, but also he had his helpers. I mean, look at the time when he got sued by David Geffen when he moved over to Geffen Records for making uncharacteristic records.
Yeah, the rockabilly and the...
Like, I'm not sure if you're allowed to swear on yours, so I'll say, okay, fuck you. I'll make it even more. So he was doing a series of things that they would, because he was interested in them for sure, but also a complete middle finger, or as we do in England, the two fingers raised for that. So
defiant, right? He is very defiant.
And the partnership with David Geffen was Elliot, his manager. I mean, Elliot was, one time I interviewed Neil. This was an interesting one. It was kind of strange, actually. I was just writing something about it recently. He had just invited to be the opening act on his tour Bert Jansch, who is one of the greatest, was sadly one of the greatest British folk singers. And Neil had fallen in love with some music that Bert had done and said, come on tour with me. And so Mojo Magazine asked me if I would have an interview with, or do a review of the show and have a little interview with Neil about, what it was about this particular song or about this album and everything that he loved so much. And it was like a big kind of influence when he was still out there playing folk in Canada before he'd moved down in the hearse back to LA. And
the hearse.
That
Yes.
great story of bumping into Stephen Stills. It doesn't seem real, but it was.
It was real. Perfect vehicle to put all your equipment in, speakers, the whole deal.
Exactly. Sorry to have talked over you. And so Neil was, it was, I think, just after the show, and he was back outside, and he'd gone straight out into his bus, as he always did. And Elliot brought in and said, Sylvie, Sylvie, we arranged to talk to her about Bert. So he was being so grumpy. Oh my Lord, it was, I pretty much almost was thrown off the bus with the most innocent questions about, this thing. And he answered perfectly. But he said, oh, that was enough. I think it was something like a 10-minute interview or a 5-minute interview. But
this is to you, he said this.
And so Elliot just was rolling his eyes and grinning behind and just said, it's only Sylvie, you can give us something.
That's the best quote. It's only Sylvie. Wow.
One of my friends at my vintage who have interviewed me for as many years as I have. And we said the same thing. Sometimes you get good Neil. Sometimes you get bad Neil. But it's just, I guess, mood,
Does he like collaboration? Is he better off being a solo artist, or as with like Crazy Horse, the leader?
That's a very interesting question. And I think it's more a case that all of the people that he's done music with, they're kind of, it sounds a bit cruel, and I don't mean it that way because it's probably got a sort of fuzzier edge, but they're almost like tools, TOOLS, in case my accent made it sound like tools that people and so it's almost like tools in the set to do something. And so if he needs to fix something, these are the people he goes to, and he knows what they can do, and that's why he sticks with those people. I don't think there's much sentiment involved in his relationship with that. It's more a case of, I need pedal steel. I know the best pedal steel person in the universe. I met him in Nashville. We played together. He played without any rehearsal on my first album in Nashville. So this is my guy. So I think that's really the way that he sees the people who play with him. I'm sure, he seems to enjoy playing with them. I pointed out to him in the last interview I did with him that he did 2 albums in a row with Crazy Horse, and he'd never done that before. This is with the Daryl Hannah years at this time.
Not too long ago, right? About a handful of years ago.
Yeah, and it was like, oh, I didn't notice that. It was almost like I didn't notice. I did too. I said, oh, was there a reason that led you to do that? Well, I wanted to try out this new barn I bought, and they would sound great in it. But it was like it was a kind of question he'd never would have thought of. It was just that at that moment, the tools he needed for the work he was doing.
That's fascinating. What about songwriting chemistry, though? I mean, who did he work best with? Stephen Stills. Was there somebody he would talk of in high regard as far as there was a real magic there?
The people he worked with, mostly with Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, they were almost like 4 individuals the whole time. All of these, I can't imagine that they were really helping each other much, other than with the singing and the arrangements and the harmonies and things like that. They had their own songs, and they were, it wasn't a Lennon-McCartney thing.
Right.
With their names on that. I remember asking him a question, and it's in, I think, one of the interviews that I've posted in the book. No, I've actually pasted into the book. I was asking him why, when they played Woodstock as Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, why he wouldn't allow the cameras to take pictures of him, or rather film him. To film him. I said, because, you've got your alter ego as Bernard Shaky, a filmmaker, wouldn't a filmmaker want to see what these did? And he said, no. And I said, well, but you were the only person in Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young that wouldn't allow themselves to be seen on the same stage. And he said, and I said, why? He said, because I'm the only person who is not Crosby, Stills and Nash. And I think that pretty much, and he laughed as he said it, or smiled, you know, it was that thing of, I do what I do, how I do it, with whom I do it.
Yeah, fascinating guy, which is also why he's still making music, because it's what he's doing now. He's not looking in the past.
It's interesting. I kind of, over the years, I've interviewed him so many times, and, you know, he's been pleasant mostly, as is, you know, I've had Grumpy Neil occasionally, but, or like, okay, 20 minutes up, or, oh, okay, 40 minutes up, and just, but over the years, I kind of said to him, I think I worked out why you don't like doing interviews. He said, and I said, it's because, you know, when you've finished an album and it's there, it's going to take at least 3 months or more before the record company are going to do anything with possibly putting it out. And you've moved on to something else. So I'm asking you about something you're already over and done with. And that little smile came on his face. You know, it's like, yeah, you got it.
Yeah, you got me. That's you figured it out. Yeah. Yeah.
Damn, I should have got that one earlier. But that,
yeah, because he seems like that for you. That's a moment of like, oh, I got through to him a little bit here. You make that connection there, and he's well. You had mentioned earlier that you built a trust with him over time.
I think that might have happened. And I can understand some of his sensitivities over time. I've interviewed so many people who just say, I didn't write them, I just felt them, or, you know, all of these things like that. Probably didn't. They sat down and got things written hard. And Paul McCartney, oh, it just came to me in a dream. It kind of does a bit, but it probably got, you know, sort of polished up a bit before you made it the Sun. But Neil was very, very kind of suspicious about it in a way, in the same way that he would only kind of do a recording at certain times when the moon wasn't full, but was 3 days before.
Yes, the full moon schedule. Yes.
All of those things. So he wasn't a woo-woo person, but this was something that he felt was very, it worked, it was true. I interviewed him about it in the past. But with the songs, he was very, very protective of those. But he, you know, he wouldn't talk about where they came from. But because he had this other person, a producer with him, who wanted to know the question too, he almost like had to tell him. So that kind of came out. It was like he was sort of thrown into the story of like, hey, yeah, I've got something I want to ask you. How do you get
that full moon schedule? He records around the full moon calendar. Where did that all come about?
It could be a superstition. Old album from the 70s, what were once, you know, something are now habits, you know, what does that
Oh,
yep.
What were vices are now habits?
No, yeah, whatever it was.
Whatever.
You do something, with Neil, it was more a case of this seemed to work. By accident, he found out that this worked. He did it second, third, fourth time, and it worked. And it became, this is how I do it. And you just, you know, this is how my body feels stronger on these days. And I said, well, on the new moon, on the full moon, never the full moon, never. It was absolutely, no, that's too much, too powerful. Has to be like so many days before. Absolutely interesting. And the stories about, you know, how his writing and everything had a slight strange thing in it too. It was mainly a kind of thing of like, you can't force it. You can't make them calm, but this is my trick for doing it in a way. And so, but he's talked to me since, so I guess he's forgiven me for letting the secret out.
I love Blues Traveler, and John Popper wrote a story in his book about when he became friends with Neil, that, the Neil that you see is the real Neil Young. I mean, he went to his house and he had a teepee in his backyard, and he said he went into his house, and I think he said all of the wood in his house was like tree bark or something, I mean, like totally nature guy. And he's written songs about that. Harvest Moon. He's got a song about just the beauty of nature. So he definitely.
Our eco man, it's had, Green Dale made a whole movie and a whole kind of musical, stage and album from it. This is thing, and having those T-shirts with Earth and the songs about Mother Earth is absolutely brilliant and totally devoted in that way.
You have a portion of the book about his period there where he knew Charles Manson. Was he hesitant to talk about that? Is that an area that it's like, I don't want to go there because it was it was a terrible period?
The Manson story, I couldn't swear to it, but I'm sure that I was the first person to write about that. So it wasn't something that people could kind of refer back to. And that was something that nobody that I was speaking to in LA wanted to talk about. I mean, the aftermath of Manson took forever, if ever, to die down. The amount of fear that was going on in LA at that time from what happened, especially with its contrast from being, the time, we'd had Woodstock where everything was love. We had the whole thing of Laurel Canyon where everything was peace and love. And there was there's an aura around Southern California that suddenly, in a way, got completely changed by the entrance of this, one vile man with his school bus full of, devotee young women who had been somehow messed up in their lives, and turned to him as their leader. So people wouldn't talk, or they talked off the record, and it was very strange. But I was just interested in it, not for any kind of prurient reason, like, oh my God, he hung out with Charles Manson. It was more trying to understand a little bit of that kind of period and what it would have been like for an artist to live with somebody that close to him through the period. And of course, Neil had gotten rid of him by the time, I think even before anything had actually happened. It's in all details will be in the book. But it kind of, as I got these small pieces of the story together, it got more and more fleshed out to where, yes, of course this happened. And the sort of kind of the basics of it was that Neil had bought that house, the second house that he had, and sold the first one. He moved into a big house where he actually did a lot of recording of some beautiful albums. Like after the gold rush in that building that he had a studio in the basement up in Topanga Canyon. Topanga was somewhere where the police couldn't easily kind of get in because there were so many little tiny off-road kind of streets that people were living in. Actually, I think one of Neil's friends had horses up there, or maybe it was his producer or something. But it was a kind of like almost like the dark hippie part. I'm not calling Neil particularly dark, but it was not the, all sweet and roses. And so he would, of course, Neil was living there, his wife, who owned the cafe that was there, the child of his wife, the stepchild was there. And in comes a bus with Charles Manson in, which makes perfect sense, a place where you can hide from the cops, and a place that's in the canyons, and he wanted to be, Manson wanted to be a music star. He had his guitar, and he wanted to be a songwriter and get a record deal. So the girls used to go up to the cafe, and restaurant, and just do little jobs for Neil's wife, and And in exchange, they'd get like any food that was left over at the end of the day and that they hadn't sold, or they'd get stuff for doing the dishes. And so they'd take that back to, to feed their master. It was a vile, misogynistic kind of pact that they had, I have to say. It makes me sick to think about it in every single way. But so it makes sense that, Neil would be eating at the restaurant. Manson would go up there, and before long he would be over hanging out at Neil's place, and the two would sit together and play. And Neil said that, actually said that Manson was a brilliant musician. He had brilliant songs. He was a great musician. That his songs were wild. It was great. And Neil tried to get him a record company with Warner's, where he was with Warner's with himself.
How close did that come to happening?
He spoke to the powers that be there, but luckily nothing happened from it. They didn't, I guess, see that. And so Neil had moved away anyway, as he often does from difficult situations. Good self-preservation. Somebody who's had so many health issues in his life, it's going to be somebody who knows his fragility and knows when it's time to move on. But so that was really the Manson story. And I just kind of figured that, when you listen to On the Beach and things like that, where it wasn't put out at the time, you think, I had to wait in line. I think there must have been some kind of darkness going on. And there was the Doom Trilogy, of course, and there was a lot of darkness in that, but that was caused by the death by drugs of a much loved band member and
But
so,
you may have been the first reporter to actually ask them about Manson.
I don't know. I think where I started with my Manson obsession, I guess, I wouldn't really call it obsession, it disappeared a bit, was talking to the Beach Boys. I was interviewing the Beach Boys, and I was trying to get a bit to the bottom of the story of how come the Beach Boys had a song that Charles Manson had written on one of their albums. But obviously, I think they kind of flubbed the names and things a bit.
Cease to Exist was Manson's. Never Learn Not to Love, it became for the Beach Boys. Right.
Mm-hmm. And it was a song that he'd got from Dennis Wilson, and how the Beach Boys got to know, or Dennis Wilson got to know Manson, is that they saw some of the girls when they were sort of driving around the canyons. They would pick up the girls who were on the street who were part of, the kind of Manson groupie girls.
Dennis said, I'll bring you over for some milk and cookies. Milk and cookies.
And so it was sex and drugs.
Yeah, crazy time. Dennis never recovered from that. So I certainly wouldn't blame Neil for distancing himself from that. So that's why I was wondering if once you brought that up, he recoiled and said, I'm not talking about that. But he didn't mind.
No, it moved on. Then moved on. That's done. Obviously aware that, he got out at the right time. Nothing happened to him and his loved ones. And that's it. He just, that kind of survival thing.
He was rocked by Kurt Cobain's death. I know that. And I think a lot of it had to do with losing Danny Whitten. I mean, there was a connection there of a beautiful person with an amazing talent who left us too soon because of addiction.
I know that he had a real kind of fondness.
He loved Danny. Danny Whitten was like a brother to him, right? He was very close to him.
It was a brother he fired from the band.
Yeah.
So basically still he could do what he had to do for the music.
It was, you're right.
It's like, you're brilliant, you're great, but I can't be around you doing this on the road. And so there was that thing. There was this thing of, he loved him, really loved him. I think that I can't recall. I was trying to remember what he'd said when I spoke to him about Kurt Cobain, but I know that finding his words, Neil's words wrote one of his songs in the suicide note. That is going to mess somebody up quite a bit.
Yeah, better to burn out than to fade away.
Never got around to it. I think that was it. I may be wrong. So you might want to check that. But
I'm looking through it here. I've got the PDF of the book up in front of me, but I know that he did get, I think there was an MTV event where it was shortly after Kurt's death that Neil got up there and was pretty emotional about it.
Was emotional about it. And I think what he said to me at that point was something like, there was a long time I kind of wanted to talk to him. That was it. I wanted to talk to him. He didn't say like about what, about what he should do when he should grow up, or whether he should get out the business, or whether he should just be a writer and not a performer. I mean, it didn't sound like that. It was just somehow he felt a connection. And of course, I mean, I hope I'm not presenting a picture of Neil as being somebody who doesn't have close friends and close connections, but there's just that's something that he can just put the wall up quickly if something is going on that's wrong, in the sense, or for him and what he's doing, for his health, for his life. And he's done that a few times in his life.
Well, he had the respect of those artists from the 90s, the godfather of grunge, all those bands, Sonic Youth and Pearl Jam and Nirvana, and you name it, you can go down the line.
I mean, of course, whenever I hear any of like the grunge Neil, I'm absolutely transported, I'd just be grinning and out of my mind with happiness. Just those, I always think this reviewing in the worst possible way as you get now sent a download and not a nice big fat LP or even CD anymore. I was listening to one of his concerts and it was like, yeah,
Mm-hmm. Well, but that's what this book is essentially bringing us back to. This is real journalism, like you say, talking with the people, not just typing in on a computer, hey Google, what did Neil Young have to say about so and so? I mean, and I just said, hey Google, and there goes my phone. Wanted me to ask it a question. No, Google, no, thank you. But yeah, so you went, and then you have these additional interviews in this latest edition that are raw Neil, right? I mean, this is unedited. This is in Neil's words, right?
Yeah, completely his words.
And these are from like sporadically throughout the last 4 decades.
Yeah, as I say, I thought I'd work out. I think what happened was this, is that I could have done an update on the book completely. But if I'd done that, that would be 3 years' work, because ever since the beginning of the new millennium, which is pretty much where I would have to start, Neil's not just put out an enormous, brilliant body of work over and over and over and over again. But he's been putting out a lot of the stuff from the archives, and then also putting out stuff that was left behind, not quite finished, or in a box under the bed, not literally, but in the sort of equivalent of that in an office room somewhere. That it would take forever to do that. And with all the stuff in between that you would have to put in on his life and his kids and his leaving Peggy as second wife, and all of these things are going on, which would be a huge one of these weighty tomes, a bit like my biography of Leonard Cohen, where you have to buy 2 because otherwise you walk disjointedly if you didn't have one in each hand to keep going. But I think that nowadays, because of online, and remember back then I'm talking about the last millennium, you couldn't find that stuff online. You might be able to go to a library and find bits and pieces. If you wanted the info, you went to the people who had the info, which was why journalism back then was a big deal. And now it's paid pittance because, hey, just ask AI. And they'll probably to you once in a while, but they're generally, they have a vague idea if it was not before 1960. So I figured that I would take some like interesting periods in his life. I mean, I read through all of my interviews. I went through, but all of my kind of filing cabinets here, full of Neil interview transcripts. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Actually, one I really liked just because it was so funny, but it was silly. I'll tell you what that one is. That was when he was trying to sell the world a Pono.
I was about to, you read my mind because I wonder what he thinks of AI, but that's where I was going to go.
Well, the Pono
was the streaming, it was a MP3 player, right?
I am so technophobic, I would probably lie.
Yeah, I think it was something where you store songs. He would probably smack me in the face for saying MP3 because it wasn't, because it was like a lossless file. Like a MP3 was like the enemy to him because that would dilute the sound. And this version had like pristine versions of the music.
Well, it was he'd been very much obsessed with sound. I think even back to Green Day and stuff, when he was talking about Blu-ray and everything. And I think that some of the British fans were getting a little bit fed up because these things cost a lot of money. And so it was a case of, yes, it's obviously the perfect way to listen to you, but hey, can we have something a bit more imperfect? So I did an interview with him in person when he was trying to sell the Pono.
And he was working hard at that. Went on Howard Stern. He went on a lot of, he was pushing it.
He loved his Pono. And so I was with him and I saw the Pono, and I don't know if you know this European chocolate. It's called a Toblerone.
No.
It's a kind of triangle, it's like, and you break off bits off the triangle as it goes along. And it looked like a Toblerone. And so I saw it and I said, let me see this Pono. And he kind of takes it off the table and big smile on his face. I said, it's a Toblerone. And he said, no, it's not, it's a Pono. But he had recognized it looked like a Toblerone. Obviously, they have those in Canada as well. So he was telling, I said, but why would we want to buy another device to, play our music on as a portable device? And he said, it's because it's easily portable, he said. And I said, well, it's not going to fit in a pocket. I mean, it's not a little flat thing. It's a triangular thing, like one of the, go to Egypt and you've got the tombs,
Yeah.
It's a pyramid. Pyramids kind of put together in a row. And so he said, yes, it is. I said, okay, put it in your pocket and walk around. And I want to see if it falls out. And he did it. And it was really funny. I said, but I bet if you dance, it will fall out. And he did a little dance on the spot. Smiling.
Yeah.
When it's portable. So there are times when he's, he can come to the challenge of that. So that was a very amusing one, but it didn't tell me some of the things that had been going on at different times in Neil's life that seemed to be constant. One of them had been his health, as I said. And so I did a piece that was a kind of contextualization, like a page and a half or something, of what happened in this particular health situation, which was when he had a brain aneurysm. And it was serious to the point of it could have killed him. And as the story goes, he, and I asked him if it was true, and he said yes. He had been on stage with the Pretenders at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He'd inducted them into the Hall of Fame. And afterwards, they usually have a band, guest bands together to play. And he was playing with them. And when he was playing, he suddenly felt like his eyes had been cracked like glass. He said, my eyes felt like I was looking at everything through broken glass. And so, this is weird. And so kind of went to the doctor and the hospital because he was out of town, of course. And they said, oh, you've got an aneurysm. And we can deal with it. It's okay. You're fine. You've probably had it in the back of there for years and it's just presented itself. And so the bit that he took to the heart was not that we can operate on it. We should operate on it. It was, oh, it's probably going to be okay. And so he went to Nashville, which was wherever he went, where he seemed to be ill, or his back had dissolved on him, his spine was being fused. And he wrote, not just made, but wrote and made a new album there. And just stayed there until such point as it got really serious and he had to be rushed back. And it was a very, very touch and go operation. To him, it was okay, I can move on. The great thing of Neil, I can move on.
That's it. Yeah. I was going to say that's probably what his best survival skill is. All right. I got this. Let's move forward. Another
one I chose was one he did with his record producer, Daniel Lenoir, when because it's spelled with an S, and he's Canadian, it would have the French canal thing. He called him Lenoise, hence the name of the album. Everybody, would call him who wasn't from the French part of Canada. And he actually turned up for the interview that I had with Neil, and which was quite near Neil's house. It was the same cafe where he met Peggy, his second wife. And it was interesting because he doesn't usually have anybody with him. When I spoke to other people who worked with him, they had to do it separately. He liked to do his own interviews, but it was because of Daniel Lenoir being there that he got to talk about something that was always forbidden for journalists to hear, which is about writing songs.
Oh,
the superstition of not giving the game away in case that if you say too much, it won't come back.
What was it about Daniel's presence that made him feel like it was okay?
Well, partly a bit. I think it was because he was being so sweet, and he'd also just recently, he being Daniel, had been in a dreadful motorcycle accident, and they feared that he might die, but he got out of it. And so maybe it was a bit like, let's not be nasty to Daniel. But I think what it was in the end that he did answer a little bit to me, but at one point I asked Daniel, I said, hey, have you got any questions you'd like to ask Neil? And Neil was looking a little bit kind of furtive. And he said, yes, you said this thing about songs. Tell me about
it. And you can't, what are you going to tell Daniel Lenoir? I'm not going to answer that.
No, not me, wasn't me. Well, that was a kind of chosen for that. And say, just different things that, the most recent interview I'd done with Neil was the first one on Zoom, which I am not fond of doing, being old school. And Neil was being kind of very mischievous, shall we say, dash evil. And as soon as I kind of got into the, into place, he turned himself off. And I said, you're going to get a sound alike, and you're going to just pretend to be Neil. And I said, turn it on again. And he turned it on for a bit, gave a little wave and a smile, and turned it off. And that one was to talk about the, Barn and the two albums in a row with Crazy Horse. But he was much more, he was a bit, I think she was a bit more open on that than he normally is. He has been, I think, since his marriage to Daryl. He seems to be more comfortable. He seems very, very happy.
That's great.
Really happy. He seems to be whatever it was, or maybe to do with his age as well. They say apparently once you get to your ripe old age, suddenly you love bunnies and children and, bows on things, and you get a sort of strange happiness in you. So it may be that, but I think he's just genuinely happy.
That's great. He is 80. So he'll be 81 in November.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Working, still putting out music. It really is. You see, that would be a difficult, big biography to write because, he'd probably outlive me and outlive all of us. It's not going to, he and Keith Richards will walk into a sunset in another 100 years' time.
Well, Keith lives right near me in Connecticut here in the U.S. And I've told this story on this podcast before, but my sister's boyfriend installs pools, and she texted me one day and said, Cody's installing the pool of Keith Richards. I'm like, what? I said, how is he? I hear he's a nice guy. He's a super nice guy. He's a great guy.
He's really, really nice.
Yeah. This book is great. You get, and I'm just looking through like the QA here of, this might've been the last interview you did with him here, but yeah, because you're talking about Barn. Yeah. So you asked, in the song Shape of You on Barn, you sing, I'm old now, but I'm still dreaming. What are you dreaming about? Well, it depends on what day it is. And then you say, I have a minute left. He says, today I'm dreaming about writing some more songs, hanging out with Daryl, and maybe going and getting some granola.
Because it was breakfast. Yeah, he made me do that interview at 6 a.m.
Wow. He's
a cruel man sometimes. But the difficulty with Zoom is you kind of get that little thing that says you've got 1 minute left, it's when you off.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to ask about stills and stuff, I mean, I can talk about, the general love relationship, which was basically hate,
him and Stephen Stills hated each other. Really? Yeah. See, I thought that was him and David Crosby.
They were like brothers, and they both had very different ways of doing things, that obviously with Neil, he is the boss, but he doesn't kind of have boss-like characteristics, if you know what I mean.
Right.
In the same, he would deny that he is, but that's it. But Stills really was much more of as he was like the military man's son, it wasn't, it was a whole different vibe. I mean, we do it this way. But there was huge love and there was huge anger. I mean, when the Stills Young album story is in there too, where, in the end, Neil did what he did and walked away from it. It's just like, we're not doing it. It's finished. It's over. And sent him a little note that said, eat a peach.
Find the Booked on Rock website at bookedonrock.com. There you can find all the back episodes of the show, the latest episode in video and audio, links to all of the platforms where you can listen to the podcast, plus all the social media platforms. We're on Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and X. Also, check out the Booked on Rock blog, find your local independent bookstore, find out all the latest hot rock book releases. And before you go, check out the Booked on Rock online store. Pick up some Booked on Rock merch. It's all at bookedonrock.com. What was his relationship like with Graham Nash and David Crosby? Well, I know David Crosby, that relationship blew up in the end because of Daryl Hannah. David Crosby was speaking up about that a little bit too much.
Well, David Crosby's very interesting. I've interviewed him tons of times. He generally 9 out of 10 times was the best person on earth. He was articulate, intelligent, absolutely wonderful, kind, funny, very, very intuitive about people and their things. Or you could get him as a 2-year-old boy, having like fits. And I've seen him in both states, but only once with the fits. I was with Graham Nash at the time, where Graham was saying, yeah, see, that's what happens. That's what I've put up with. And they all kind of, in the end, let him be. And I think in a way, probably, Neil still liked him enough, but he didn't want to be part of anybody's band or anything. Nobody owned him. And that was a strange thing, as I say, from the beginning, when I asked him that question about being at Woodstock and you wouldn't allow to be filmed on stage, but you love films, you're in films, you work with film. And why? You were part of the band, you were part of Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And he just said, I'm the only one who was not Crosby, Stills and Nash. So it's that whole thing I remember, I think I mentioned this in the original introduction. I don't know if that got kept, but I think it was my friend Charles Shaw Murray, who was at Sounds when I was at Sound. Oh no, he was Enemy when I was at Sounds magazine in London back in the day. And he just said there's a certain bunch of musicians that you refer to as the awkward squad, and basically Neil was like the emir of awkward. He just would not do what he was asked to do or told to do, or it was just he was his own man.
Nobody owned him. Nobody owned him, but he did own that hearse. What do we know about that? That was, I think, when it was in March of '66 that he came.
I thought
this is in your book here. I see there's a hearse rolling along the freeway, picked out by the oncoming headlights. The driver's face, pale, softly angular, framed by two slabs of backwoods, sideburns, and a Beatles cut, is set in a purposeful frown. The hearse's back windows are discreetly curtained, the front ones fogged from the cold night air, and the smoke pluming out of the coffin compartment. Behind the curtain, someone's skinning up yet another number for the road. It's March 1966, and there's been something of an outbreak of young, long-haired dope smokers driving old cars from the U.S. to Canada to escape the Vietnam draft. That opens that chapter.
I've forgotten that. Yes, because he came to America when most of the kind of young hip music people were getting the hell out of America and California because of the draft. It was a kind of very interesting direction to be going and a perfect one. But he had something in mind over the years in Canada when Neil played in one of his bands or other, but mostly when he was doing his kind of folk music and solo music there. He had come across Stephen Stills, who was also doing his solo kind of folk music stuff. And he knew that this is a person he wanted to work with. As I say, he likes his tools. He has his musicians who are tools, and this was Stills. And also he needed a buddy. He was young. And if you've got a nice hearse, you don't have to get hotels, at least three people can sleep in a hearse quite well. But what was so fascinating, it sounds almost kind of mythical, but is in fact true, is he was pretty much driving back to the freeway because he couldn't find Stills. He was asking around. It's a big city, LA. I know, I used to live there.
No cell phones.
Exactly. No cell phones. Thank you. And so he was looking around and it was about to get back on the freeway and go back somewhere else and try and find him somewhere or whatever, or go back home. And somewhere that in the traffic, even back then, the traffic was always solid on the sort of big boulevards out there. He spotted Stills. In a car who could pulled into a sort of liquor store that was on a corner there and just stood outside and there we go, the Buffalo Springfield. The whole start, the button that got it going. Though I guess the button originally was coming down to LA and leaving behind Canada. So a good relationship, a deep relationship, a brotherly relationship with Stills. But my God, they were at each other like flipping cats the whole time.
Wow. Yeah, I always thought that would be with him and Crosby, because Crosby's known to be similar to Neil that way. But you talk to people that have all these great insights as to Neil. One person saying Neil was a lot less reclusive back then, meaning the late 60s, than he was later. He used to hitchhike around LA with his friend, the woman who wrote the song Windy, Ruth Ann Friedman, and he hung with Jack Nietzsche, Ry Cooder, and the Monkees. Though everyone wrote them off as fakes, there was a big connection there, and Neil played on the music for their movie Head. Yeah.
Yeah, he was out and about, but again...
And Stephen auditioned for the Monkees. His teeth weren't nice enough, so they said sorry.
Yeah,
wow.
Isn't it? Yeah, but back then you have to imagine, he wasn't known as such, other than maybe when he was playing at the Whiskey A Go-Go with the dancing girls behind him and everything. He said he loved that.
Well, they say that's where the Buffalo was the best, playing those gigs there, the Whiskey.
And even, it was, but he was still having to kind of, put himself around. You had to, if you start something at all, I'm sure when you started in your work as a writer, you can't really just sit there and hope it all comes to you. That will come later once you're doing something that people know about and say, oh, let's call this person. So, but in the beginning, you are putting yourself about, and it was such an interesting thing because he was in a completely different country, the difference between being, where he was in Canada and being on the streets of LA. I mean, I flew out to LA to be a rock writer in 1977. And I was like, as my eyes were as big as saucers, I was like almost kissing the ground and hugging palm trees. It was coming to some very strange place that was not London.
Whole another world. Yeah.
What the hell? I said, that black building, or look at the size of that pizza,
Right.
kind of thing that he was going through all of those kind of things, but also going through it with a terrible disease, an ailment, which was epilepsy.
Yeah, the strobe lights would trigger his seizures.
That's certainly one of the things that it does. But it came to the point that when they were out on the road, they were out on the road opening for the Beach Boys at one point, where he had some terrible attacks. And it got to the point where I think some of the members of the band thought that he was putting it on because, immediately, 7 beautiful girls would come up and nurse his head in their hands and look after him. But it wasn't. He was somehow doing that,
Wow. Thanks so much for checking out the Booked on Rock podcast. If you've just found the podcast, welcome. If you've been listening, thank you so much for your support. And make sure you tell a friend, a family member, share on social media, and let people know about Booked on Rock. And if you do like the podcast, make sure you subscribe, give a 5-star review wherever you listen to the Booked on Rock podcast. We're on Amazon, Apple, iHeart, Spotify, Spreaker, TuneIn, and on YouTube Music. You can check out the full episodes on video, along with video highlights from episodes on the Booked on Rock YouTube channel. Find it at Booked on Rock. Thanks again for listening. Now back to the show. He wrote Mr. Soul in the hospital after he'd collapsed on stage. He collapsed a lot, according to the book.
Yeah,
It would happen during the closing number a lot. It seemed to happen mostly there. So he would collapse and bandmate would make sure to catch the guitar and make sure the guitar didn't break and hit the stage. And off he went to the hospital many, many times. I didn't realize it was that serious.
it was, and somehow maybe it was like one of those youthful things he came out of, because I don't think it's very easy to actually eliminate it. I don't know for sure, but my feeling is it's something that you've got.
And
But
women loved him. They liked to take care of him. They wanted to mother him.
that was it. And he actually seemed to like that himself, because remember, 2 of his wives were people who were owned or worked in restaurants and were good at serving people. So there seems to be something in him, at least, that was drawn to people who were, not maybe as flaky as some rock people might be.
Yeah. It was a dangerous thing with that culture, with the drugs and all that stuff, I would think. He described his seizures as a psychedelic experience to Cameron Crowe. You slip into some other world, your body's flopping around and you're biting your tongue and batting your head on the ground, but your mind is off somewhere else. The only scary thing about it is realizing you're totally comfortable in this void, and that shocks you back into reality.
Yeah. That is remarkable. I mean, that was a brilliant quote. I think that Cameron did some of the best interviews ever with him. I think they really bonded. It was when Cameron was young, and I think he kind of somehow felt, I don't know if it was safe, but somehow he just felt good talking to Cameron.
What do you think Cameron's strengths, and what is his biggest strength? Why is he able to get such great interviews?
I think that there was a kind of, there was something that he has that I kind of think that I have a bit, which was wanting to know, really wanting to know, really wanting to know what makes that person do what they do, makes them come out with what they come out with that work.
And that
It-
makes the subject feel special, feel respected.
I think they feel that this person is interested in the whole picture in a way and hasn't got an agenda. Because, with magazines, there's not always, but quite often there might be an editor who has some kind of an agenda, or they'll send you to interview somebody, but they don't tell you what questions to ask, but there might be a few that you can't not let them answer this, It's that called the awkward question. It's usually the one that's at the end of the interview. So if they decide to walk out, you at least have got plenty of stuff. But it's that thing of this person seems to want to know for, a different reason. I think maybe it was that, maybe it was the fact that a lot of journalists of my era, the men, it was nearly all men. I wasn't the only woman, but it was quite often the case that I was when it was an interview day. That a lot of the men back then who were journalists, they were more into the kind of the old sort of the previous kind of journalism that had come into the world, which was, I've forgotten the word that they used for it. It was having a brain memory.
Sensationalism.
No, not so much that. It was in the 1970s, the style of journalism really, really changed. If you looked at magazines beforehand, there'd be like these really happy little pop magazines, all full of, oh, Beatles, wonderful stuff. Or there would be kind of serious articles, if there was anything at all about music in the newspapers, pop music. But then this thing called gonzo journalism came in.
Hunter Thompson, yeah.
Hunter Thompson and Hunter S. Thompson Gonzo, which was basically that you're playing a part in the whole story. In the past, you wouldn't really be writing stories on, say, if it was Neil Young, you wouldn't be talking about me and Neil Young and this, it would be Neil Young. You're getting his story. But with Gonzo, you're pretty much part of the character and the story. And it made for very interesting articles a lot of the time, sometimes just completely, people just being, complete idiots because they just want their name in print. Speaking, that was the style back then. So I think that there was something about Cameron that was more, it was more sort of honest and fresh in a sense. And
genuine interest.
Because there was a whole lot of guys that would go to interviews dressed in their leather coats and look like I'm tougher than you are, while speaking to a heavy metal band or something. There was quite a lot of sort of things like that going on in UK as well. So I think there's something about him, that kind of innocence, because he was young and he'd done his homework and he had things he wanted to know. And I think that appealed to Neil.
Yep, and you can't fake that. It's genuine interest in the other person.
Exactly. And I kind of generally like to have that approach too. I've found that over my career, when I've been reading biographies and especially book ones, that it might be one subject, for example, Leonard Cohen, and I thought that everybody has a gap, who's written a book, has gaps in the same place. And it's like, well, what happened in that gap? Why hasn't anybody done that? They all jumped because they're all referring to the last and adding a bit more or changing it around a little bit.
And the gap just gets deeper.
It's still there. I don't know if it gets deeper. I think it's just more annoying to me. And it's like, well, what happened in that gap? And in the case of Leonard Cohen, it was because I'd gone to Leonard had put out an album called The Future, which was his biggest album in America, made him a lot of money. He was now much more known in the US, and in the past it had only been Europe and the UK that really kept him going. So he was making big money. He was engaged to be married to a wonderful, beautiful actress who had her own income, very big, and also his life was together. And then he just decided to like pack his bag at the end of the tour, shave his head, wear monk's clothes, and live on Mount Baldy, this godforsaken mountain that I went to because I was writing this book and wanted to know what it was like, and stayed there for like 5.5 years. And then came back, obviously left his fiance and left the band. It just went. And nobody had seemed to think it was an idea to find out why. They might have got, yes, he went to, up to a Zen monastery. Why?
That shocks me because that's a story. That is a story.
There's a whole book on that.
It's a book.
And it was these things, that people never spoke to any of the women in Leonard Cohen's life, the women that loved him, who had his children, who were the subject of songs. It's like, why they didn't do that? Why didn't they mention Neil Young's, wife? But, and it's just these gaps, almost like you're kind of being polite and you're not looking. Yes, if it was something that was so private that was not to be looked at, I'm very much into closing the door. I don't want to hear behind bedroom doors or anything. But it's that thing of why have people not done that? So I think that maybe Cameron's thing was he was really interested. And so this kind of conversational approach, I think, it seemed to be a bit of what his writing was like.
Yeah, makes sense.
Young, innocent, and loved music, and was very smart and had a very good mind of what can make things, what can make a good story, not just for people to read, but that tells you something.
Well, you've offered a great insight into not just Neil Young, which is what we want, we were here to talk about, but in just being a great writer or journalist and asking the right questions. And it's cool because, I had my scripted questions and then we just like went off script. I threw the questions aside and was like, let's just BS. Let's talk Neil, and then whatever else comes up. And I appreciate that. I think you've just made me a better interviewer. So thank you.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that you did a perfectly good job on your own. And thank you. Yes, those are much more interesting for me than to just list, what did he think about one person or what did he do with another person? Those, I think, are out there, easily found in the world. But I think it's that kind of, what is it about, for me personally, is that how come when I was a little girl or sort of early teens, maybe by then, in London, still living at home with my mom and dad, I would go out with money that I really had to work hard to get, because all you can do is like sort of side jobs after school. And I would buy a Neil Young album and I would sit there and learn every word of them backwards, I would sit and listen to After the Gold Rush and just like cry my up with the beauty of it. And just all of these things, you just think, well, this music suddenly appeared in the age of the world when I came to like an age of wanting to hear music all the time and nothing else. And so, yeah, it's that thing of who is this person who did this thing, who's made this? And I still go back, depending on moods. I've got all different Neil albums for different moods of the day, and I just go, I've even got them in CD in case something happened to the vinyl, and I use it, I've got the extras, and I will just go and just bathe myself in it. I just drown myself in Zoomer, if I'm in a Zoomer mood, wonderful, wonderful album. Or if I just want to rock out, it's anything with Crazy Horse.
That's great. There's nothing like making that connection with an artist and their music and just music in general. Without it, where are we, right? And I get the feeling there's probably in your mind there's more to Neil Young than you're probably curious to find out more about him. It's probably something else.
I'm waiting for the next interview. I hope it's not on Zoom again, Neil, please. It's much more fun in person. But one of the things that I loved about Neil too, as I say, that thing that my writer friend calling him the emir of the awkward, I love the fact that his own label sued him for making unrepresentative Neil Young albums. I mean, you can't, that's the pinnacle.
That's rock and roll right there. That's
rock and roll, isn't it?
That's the best. Neil, like you said, nobody is the boss of Neil Young. The Booked on Rock podcast is part of the Boneless Podcasting Network. If you're a fan of classic rock and classic film like I am, go to boneless.lovable.app to find over 20 great shows there. That's boneless.lovable.app, or just go to bookedonrock.com, the Boneless Podcasting Network. It is what you want it to be. Listen with confidence. The book is Neil Young, Reflections in Broken Glass, the updated edition, out now.
I don't know if you want to mention it, but it's out on a Third Man, which is, it's got its own story a little bit, which is out on Third Man, which was the label for Jack White.
Oh, I didn't know that. Third Man, Third Man Books.
Okay.
So maybe people should go. Let's see do they have a website? Third Man Books.
It's cheaper on Amazon, but just in case they want to know, this was put out on the label that Jack White owns. He's got his record label, and he's got these two or three big stores, one in London, one in Detroit, one in Nashville. And of course, he has history with Neil, because Neil went to his studio in Nashville. And in the studio, there was one of those kind of kiosks, like a phone kiosk, but it's a recording kiosk that they used to have in the oldie days in England at seaside resorts, where you could put your money in a slot and you can record a 45 on it, very primitively, and you give it to your mum and dad. They pat you on the head or kick up the butt, whatever you get from
Yeah.
You're not going to become a rock star. And so those two had history, and so it's come back to a really good home. It's come to Jack White's label.
That's great. Well, it is right here on the website. So I'm going to put a link up to the website, thirdmanbooks.com. And they have your book up there among the new books, with the Sleep comic book and Ring Shout on Saturn. I Am an I Don't Know Why. It looks like a children's book. And there is yours right there. Neil Young, Reflections in Broken Glass, updated and revised, got its own page. So I will direct people to that page as well, thirdmanbooks.com.
Fascinating to me that, he wanted to put that out. I think, how old it is.
Yeah, fantastic. And now it says May 26th was the release date.
Well, I think they put that up, but they didn't have any books ready. So it's wonderfully, it's got that kind of homegrown kind of quality. It's not very slick like a record label would kind of have exact dates of things coming out and where, and then the interviews should be at that time. It was the absolute opposite to that. It was, I think a couple of people in London were saying, "Oh, we want to buy it, but it's not in yet." I said, "We look at it; it's coming at the end of August or something in the UK." So it's,
well, not to embarrass you here, Sylvie, but here we go. About the author, Sylvie Simmons, an award-winning writer, one of the foremost music journalists working today, born in London. She moved to LA in 1977. Sounds, Cream, Kerrang, Q, and Mojo you've written for. Author of a number of books, including the New York Times bestsellers, I'm Your Man, The Life of Leonard Cohen, and Face It, Debbie Harry's memoir. And Simmons still writes for Mojo and has interviewed Neil Young on many occasions since. Yes, and you have all of it right there, old school, right there in front of you on hard copy, right?
Yeah.
Cool.
And these cabinets that are on the wall the other side of them.
Nice. Thank you so much, Sylvie. This was great.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
That's it. It's in the books.